Okay, we're back to it, and still in Chapter 4 for the Law of Journalism and Mass Communications. We're still dealing with libel. We got the different elements that we're going through with libel. Our last video, we were talking about one of the elements, which is publication, and now we're getting into the identification part, which is the second element. Again, the elements for libel: it's a statement of fact that is published, that is concerning the plaintiff, and that is defamatory, that has caused damage or harm, and for which the defendant is going to be liable. So, it is a statement of fact, published, so it has to be communicated to a third party. Concerning the plaintiff is the identification part. Defamatory, so it's false, that has caused harm, and again, the defendant is going to be liable for that. So identification is where you are able to show that the statement that was made identifies this person. That can be either directly or indirectly. So it could be where it calls somebody out, or there's enough of an inference, or there's enough of the detail that you're able to connect the dots. You're able to conclude as to who this person is in the statement, and that is the plaintiff. You ask the question, is the material of and concerning the plaintiff? Can you identify the plaintiff, or is this plaintiff identified in the statement or identifiable? It may be where it's identifying the person, so reasonably related to that plaintiff, giving their name or title, or within the context, you're able to identify the person. Or maybe there's a statement that's general, but there's some visual that's included, like a photograph, that allows you to make that connection. So the communication part ties into this. So the publication has to go out to third parties, but it has to also be where, as long as somebody other than the plaintiff and defendant recognize that plaintiff, then that counts. So if it's an inside joke, or if it's just something that the plaintiff and defendant would know, who they are talking about, that doesn't count. And one other factor for this, it doesn't have to be intentional. So this can be where the person making the statement, the defendant, winds up making a statement about someone, and they didn't want to give enough information for other people to figure it out, and yet they do. So they're trying to make it where it's anonymous, or they're trying to tell a story, and they're not naming anybody, but people are able to figure it out because they provided enough detail. I believe the textbook had an example with Sammy Hagar, who's a singer who wrote his memoirs and implicated a woman. He did not name her, but he gave enough information that people were able to figure out and identify who she was. So she used that as part of the basis for her lawsuit. So again, it doesn't have to be where there's the person being named, but if there's enough information that people are able to figure out who it is, then that counts. All right. As part of this, the plaintiff has to show that they were harmed. Now, that could be either as an individual or as part of a group. So if they're not identified directly, but they're identified as part of a group, that is another way that that identification requirement can be met. Depending on the size of the group, that can matter. So in lawsuits that have been brought where there's a group that is smaller than 25, courts have found that that is small enough that they were able to determine who the individual was. Fewer than 100 members, well, the more people are included in the group, the more that is diluted, and the harder it is to identify that person as a plaintiff. And then more than 100 members, more than likely, it becomes tenuous. So, and here's one other factor with identification where you have a fictional account, and you have somebody who is identified in that fictional account, even though it is stated as fiction. That's a false statement, and if there are disparaging things that are said that can harm someone in that fictional account, that that qualifies. All right, so that's the second element, identification. That gets us through that. So we've got publication, we've got identification, and we'll move on to the next one.